today, and the whole reason we're here is because there is a gender gap in the higher judiciary, and we know there are fewer numbers of women. But the data that we have collected over the last few months, and some of it, I really have to thank Aparna and Rangan especially, because your work was so critical as a starting point for us when we started this work. But some of the data which we've collected right up till the end of 2024 and even today verifies the fact that things have not improved since your study in 2018. And I just want to give an overview of these numbers currently. So in the Supreme Court, we only have 6% of judges currently. That's 2 women judges out of 33. And in the high courts, it's 14%. And since 2021, 23 appointments have been made in the Supreme Court. That is, over 2/3 of the court has been reconstituted, and not a single appointment has been a woman. So you've had 2/3 of the court being filled up with no women appointees since Justice Nagaratna, Bela Trivedi, and Justice Hema Kohli. In the lower judiciary, as has been mentioned, the numbers are better in terms of representation of women. It's 32% as of 2022. And surprisingly, when you look at the representation of judges elevated from the bench in India, men versus women, women make up 27.6% of high court judges elevated from the bench. So roughly those numbers are translating, like with 32% women in the lower judiciary to 27% in the higher judiciary. But there's clearly still a steep drop-off, and that is coming from elevations from the bar, that is from women lawyers. Not many people are aware that there is a 2:1 norm. It's kind of an unsaid norm which most courts follow, where for every 2 judges elevated from the bar, you elevate 1 from the bench. So roughly you would expect about 66% of all judges in the higher judiciary to be from the bar. And this is largely followed. If you look at the current numbers today, it's about 68% of all judges are from the bar and the rest are from the bench. But this isn't the case with women. So with women judges, the current breakup is, out of women judges from the bar make up only 11% of all judges elevated from the bar. And 11% is a number which is even lower than the overall representation of women lawyers, which Aparna raised earlier, which was at 15%. Ultimately, what are we aiming for in terms of gender diversity for the judiciary, and why we're asking these questions is that if you have a constitutional democracy where you have a population of women which is 48.5%, no matter the actual numbers of lawyers or judges in absolute numbers, the representation at the levels of the higher judiciary ought to be counted against the population of the country and not necessarily the numbers of lawyers or the judicial officers present. Of course, there are many other barriers which women lawyers face as they enter through the profession and as they attempt to thrive in the legal profession. There's a lot of discrimination and stereotyping which they face, which leads to poorer visibility. And this is one of the factors which contributes to them being appointed at a later date. But the data itself on the appointments, of the age of women's appointments and their tenure, definitely points to a trend that when the collegium is considering these names, there is some sort of bias to appoint women at a later age, no matter what their qualifications are. So for example, even today, the average tenure of a Supreme Court woman judge is 4.4 years, as against 5.45 years for male judges. So it's just a 1-year age difference, but when you look at Supreme Court tenures, which are roughly only 5 years, 1 year is a huge mark. And as Rangan mentioned, only 2 judges have made it to the collegium in a decision-making capacity. 4 judges have been part of it, but only 2 have made decisions. And it's also why we've never had a woman Chief Justice of India. Justice Nagaratna will only be Chief Justice in 2027 for a total span of 36 days. So you question why she couldn't have been appointed earlier. Justice Indu Malhotra, who is the only woman who has been elevated directly from the bar, she has the second shortest tenure of any judge appointed in the collegium system. She had a tenure of just 2.8 years, which you would wonder, since it's a direct elevation, she ought to have been at the Supreme Court for a much longer period. The difference in the high courts is similar. There's an age gap there as well of about 1.8 years, which impacts seniority to reach the high court collegiums and to reach CJ positions in the high court. Speaking of chief justices, in the 25 high courts which we have across the country, 11 have never had a chief justice, and 15 courts have never had a woman acting chief justice, which means there's never been a senior-most woman in 15 courts in the entire country. And of course, we're just scratching the surface with this data. This data is only what's been made available through public sources, through High Court and Supreme Court websites. It's, as Aparna and Rangan and Apurv mentioned, there is potential for so much more qualitative data analysis and to be able to think of more, ask more nuanced questions and get more nuanced answers, which would help towards law reform. But just looking at the data which we have right now, itself is, we feel, is a reminder that the appointment system needs some sort of challenge, whether that's through, if we're asking the question of looking at minimum eligibility criteria, or if we're asking for different considerations for women or other minorities. These are some of the questions which we at CLPR are right now asking ourselves as we go through this data and as we're talking to people about what are the kinds of reforms which are available to us and what the feasibility of these actions are. I mean, the last major judicial reform effort was the NJAC, and the 4th judge's case held it unconstitutional. But the NJAC didn't touch on gender diversity or any other form of diversity. And in that case, the Supreme Court itself acknowledged the need for reforming the collegium process. They spoke about introducing minimum eligibility criteria for appointments. They spoke about greater transparency. And they asked the government, the executive, to formulate a new memorandum of practice, which till date, there has been no new memorandum of practice to decide to amend the collegium system in any way. So I think these are to measure the feasibility of these options, and even things like constitutional law reform, keeping in mind that there is a current private member's bill which has been introduced by a Tamil Nadu MP to amending the constitution to say that the judges from the high judiciary should reflect the population of the country in terms of gender and caste. So that's a bill which was introduced in January, and we need to see where that will go and see what efforts, other similar efforts are possible. So I just wanted to raise some of these questions that we're considering right now.